The digital clock on my stove read 7:42 a.m. when the world began to tilt. I was standing on my porch, coffee steam curling into the crisp morning air, watching the neighborhood wake up. Then I saw her, Karen. She didn't walk, she strutted. Clad in a neon safety vest that screamed for attention she didn't deserve, she marched up my driveway gripping a clipboard like a holy relic. She didn't knock, she didn't offer a neighborly greeting. With a practiced, aggressive flick of the wrist, she slapped a bright red flyer onto my front door. It wasn't a notice. It was a $4,500 HOA exit violation fine. She stepped back, whipped out her phone, and began snapping photos of my windows, my porch, my life. "We own you," she muttered, loud enough for the morning silence to carry it to my ears. "Leaving isn't an option. We'll take the house before we let you walk." I didn't move, I didn't shout, I just watched. Because what Karen didn't see was the blacked-out heavy-duty truck idling directly behind her. She didn't see my son Mark step out of the driver's seat. He was in full uniform, his badge catching the early sun, his eyes locked on her with the kind of predatory calm you only see in people trained to handle chaos. "What exactly?" Mark asked, his voice low and vibrating with authority. "Are you accusing my father of?" Karen froze, the phone in her hand trembled. She had no idea that she hadn't just made a mistake, she had walked into a trap of her own making. For 20 years, this house has been the only thing that didn't shift beneath my feet. I bought it after I finished my service, still carrying the dry heat of the desert in my bones and the habit of checking every lock twice before bed. This land sits on an old survey line my father used to trace with his boot heel. He always told me, property isn't just dirt, son, it's responsibility. I took that to heart. That's why, when the HOA decided they owned more of my life than I'd ever signed away, I didn't get angry. I got educated. Most people don't realize there's a specific statute in our state that allows pre-HOA parcels to exempt themselves if they follow a very narrow, very difficult filing process. It's a legal needle eye. I read that statute until I could recite it in my sleep. I filled out every page, notarized every signature, and walked the documents into the county office myself. The clerk looked at the paperwork, then looked at me. "You realize they're going to hate you for this, right?" "I'm not doing it for them," I told him. "I'm doing it for the man who built it." I filed quietly, cleanly, legally. I was officially a ghost in their system, a sovereign plot of land in the middle of their kingdom. Karen found out 48 hours later. Karen wasn't just on the board, she was the board. She lived for the gotcha moments. She flourished in the space between a rule and a punishment. To her, a neighborhood wasn't a community, it was a series of variables to be controlled. When she realized I had stepped outside her jurisdiction, the air in the neighborhood changed. Suddenly, cars slowed down in front of my house. Random letters appeared in my mailbox, concerns about the shade of my curtains or the brightness of my porch light. You could feel the surveillance like humidity before a storm. That night, Mark sat at my kitchen table, methodically polishing his badge. He looked up at me, his face unreadable. "They won't like losing control, Dad. People like that, they don't go away, they escalate." He was right. The harassment started with the small stuff, the petty phase. I was trimming my hedges on my own property, mind you, when Karen marched up the sidewalk. She didn't introduce herself. She looked at the trimmings on the grass and sighed. "Some homeowners struggle with basic upkeep," she said, her voice dripping with a fake, honeyed concern. "But it's all right, we'll work on getting you compliant." I blinked. Compliant. "Uniformity is our gospel here," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. It stayed fixed on her face like a mask. From that day on, I was the neighborhood's problem child. If my truck was an inch too close to the curb, I got a note. If my trash bin was visible for 10 minutes after the truck passed, my doorbell rang. She talked about compliance, the way a zealot talks about salvation. But then the fines started. At first they were $50, $100, then they got creative. They fined me for the flagpole my father had installed in 1994, calling it an unapproved structure. They fined me for my fishing trailer. They even sent a board member to take photos through the slats of my back fence. When I confronted him, he didn't apologize. He just muttered, "We have authority," and walked away. That's when the safety committee was formed. It was a group of Karen's hand-picked disciples. They wore matching reflective vests and carried high-powered flashlights. They'd walk past my house at 2:00 a.m., the beams of their lights dancing across my bedroom walls. I'd watch them from the shadows, recording every movement on my security cameras. They thought they were intimidating me. They didn't realize they were providing me with a mountain of evidence for a harassment suit. The breaking point came in the form of a survey correction notice. It was a professional-looking packet, stamped with official-looking seals. It claimed that due to a historical mapping discrepancy, 10 feet of my backyard actually belonged to the HOA. I almost laughed. My father had marked those lines with concrete and sweat. I knew every inch of that dirt. But the HOA was trying to rewrite history with a laser printer and a highlighter. They were claiming an easement had been reinterpreted. In property law, that's not how it works. An easement gives someone the right to use land for a specific purpose, like utility lines. It doesn't transfer ownership. But Karen wasn't playing by the law. She was playing a game of chicken, betting I wouldn't have the money or the spine to fight a land grab. I didn't call a lawyer yet. Instead, I went to the county archives. I spent 6 hours digging through dusty ledgers and digital records until I found the original plat map from 1952. The HOA's corrected map wasn't just wrong, it was a forgery. They had digitally altered the coordinates and forged a surveyor's signature. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. This was a felony. I waited for the next board meeting. The community center was packed. Karen sat at the head of the table, looking like a queen presiding over her court. She saw me walk in and gave that smug, tilted head smile. "We're discussing the land reclamation today," she announced, her voice amplified by a cheap microphone. "It's about the integrity of our borders." I walked right up to the front. I didn't wait to be called on. I placed 2 documents on the table. One was the original 1952 map, the other was their correction. "This map you sent me," I said, my voice calm. Projecting to the back of the room, "the coordinates are falsified, and this signature, I called the surveyor's office this morning. He's been retired for 5 years and says he never signed this." The room went deathly silent. Karen's face went from pale to a mottled, angry purple. "You're obstructing a private investigation," she shrieked. "You don't even belong to this HOA anymore. You have no standing here." "You're right," I said, leaning in. "I don't belong to you, which makes this attempted land grab a criminal act of fraud and attempted grand theft. And since you used the mail to send it, that's a federal interest." Karen laughed. It was a shrill, desperate sound. "You think the police care about a property line? Get out of here before I have you trespassed." I didn't leave. I checked my watch. "The police are already here, Karen, but they aren't here for me." The back doors of the community center swung open. Mark walked in, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 detectives and a representative from the district attorney's office. The color finally drained from Karen's face. She looked at the clipboard in her hand as if it had suddenly turned into a snake. The fallout was a slow-motion car wreck. Once the fraud investigation started, the budget reports I'd looked at earlier became the nail in the coffin. It turned out Karen hadn't just been obsessed with power. She'd been using the HOA's improvement fund as her personal piggy bank. The $4,500 fines, they were being funneled into a shell company she'd set up for consulting. The safety committee vanished overnight. The reflective vests were traded for legal counsel. A week later, I was back on my porch. The $4,500 fine notice was still on my door. I'd left it there as a reminder. I saw Karen's car pull into her driveway. She didn't strut this time. She looked smaller, older, broken. She saw me watching her, and for the first time, she didn't look away. She looked terrified. Mark pulled up in his truck, stopping at the end of my driveway. He hopped out, tossed a folder onto my lap, and sat on the porch step. "The board is being dissolved," he said. "The state is stepping in for an audit. Karen's looking at multiple counts of wire fraud and falsifying legal documents." I took a sip of my coffee. It was perfectly hot. She told me leaving wasn't an option. Mark chuckled. "Well, she was half right. She's the one leaving now. The bank started the foreclosure on her place this morning." I looked out over my yard. The grass was exactly the height I wanted it to be. The flagpole was catching the wind. The silence of the neighborhood didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like peace. Karen had spent years trying to own the dirt beneath my feet, never realizing that the man who built this house had planted something she could never touch. He'd planted the truth. I stood up, walked to the front door, and finally peeled that red flyer off the wood. I crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the trash. "Hey, Mark," I called out. "Yeah, Dad. Think we should paint the shutters? I was thinking a nice, non-compliant blue." He grinned. "I'll go get the brushes." The HOA thought they were the ones keeping the peace. They thought they were the ones in control. But as I watched the sun set over the property line that hadn't moved an inch in 70 years, I knew the truth. They were just passing through. This land was mine.